The black stallion struck the sail rail before the first bidder had finished, laughing at the charcoal on Louisa Kelland's glove. The blow rang across the lower yard at Rookhaven Park and silenced even the men who had been talking over one another about bloodlines, stud fees, and winter prospects. A silver cup toppled from the edge of Louisa's drawing board, spilling cold coffee across the corner of a half-finished study. No one apologized. They had not noticed when the cup was set upon her work, any more than they had noticed the buyers crowding between her and the pale October light. They noticed the horse. Everyone noticed the horse. He came against the rail again. Black shoulders tight beneath a satin coat. 4 feet striking packed earth as 2 Peverell handlers shortened the lead, and another reached for the twitch. "Hold him steady," Mr. Neville Peverell snapped. "He has stood for worse than this." The stallion flattened his ears and swung away from the hand near his muzzle. A murmur passed through the private audience, gathered beneath the stable gallery. Several gentlemen stepped back without admitting they had moved. Louisa closed her fingers around the charcoal stub. The catalogue called The Horse Sovereign, 6 years old, a celebrated Peverell stallion, whose breeding rights had already drawn promises from 3 counties. The card fixed to the outer rail bore the name in polished black letters. Yet nothing, in the animal's eye, suggested the confidence of a horse accustomed to being admired. He watched every hand as though it might become a threat. "A fine temperament for the breed," one of the buyers said, though he had retreated behind a post. "He only needs to know who commands him." "Then perhaps you should show him," another replied. Laughter followed, uneasy and brief. Louisa looked down at her ruined sketch. The spill had blurred the near foreleg, but the curve of the neck remained. She had drawn that tension before the first shout. No one had asked what she saw. They had commissioned a catalogue image, not an opinion. Lady Camilla Peverell stood beneath the gallery arch in grey-green silk, one gloved hand resting upon the handle of her parasol. "The artist may begin again," she said. "There is still sufficient light." Louisa lifted the wet page without answering. The word artist was not praise in Camilla's mouth. It was a substitute for Louisa's name, just as convenient as girl, companion, or poor relation. At 29, Louisa had learned that people preferred a woman's labor when they could detach it from the woman herself. "Miss Kelland has already drawn more than most of us can see," said a quiet male voice from the terrace above. Several heads turned. Dominic Caverton, Duke of Casterleigh, descended the stone steps without haste. He wore a dark riding coat and carried no cane. His presence changed the yard before he spoke again. Men straightened. Servants made space. Lady Camilla's expression softened by calculation. Louisa did not move. She had been hired by the Rookhaven steward to prepare studies for the sale catalogue. A duke's notice could raise her position for an hour and make it more precarious afterward. Neville gave the handlers a sharp gesture. "Bring his head round. His Grace should see the shoulder." The nearest man drew hard on the shortened lead. The stallion reared just enough to bring every conversation to an end. A stable boy dropped a brush. Jasper Tolland, Rookhaven's head groom, took 1 step forward. Neville blocked him with an arm. "Peverell men know the horse." "Your men are angering him," Tolland said. "They're correcting him." The twitch came closer to the stallion's lip. Louisa's stomach tightened. She had seen frightened horses punished for making fear visible. The memory was old, but her body recognized it before thought did. She put the ruined drawing into her folio, fastened the strap, and turned away from the rail. She could not stop Neville. She had no authority in the yard, no patron powerful enough to shield her from the accusation of interfering with valuable bloodstock. She could at least refuse to make a graceful image from what they were doing. The small bone whistle tied to her sketch case struck the brass clasp as she lifted it. One note sounded, then another, then a third. They were soft, almost lost beneath the stallion's breathing. The horse came down. His forefeet met the earth, and his entire body changed from violent resistance to rigid attention. One handler swore under his breath. Louisa stopped walking. The whistle hung motionless against the case. She had not raised it to her lips. She had not intended to call anything. The stallion turned his head toward her. Beneath the black forelock, two worlds curved close together like mirrored commas. Louisa forgot the watching crowd. Her gaze dropped to the right hind heel when he shifted. Inside the dark hair was a pale fleck no larger than a thumbnail. Her fingers went cold around the case handle. She took one slow step toward the gate, not the horse. The stallion moved with her. The lead slackened between him and the handler. Louisa stopped. He stopped. Someone behind her whispered, "Good God." Neville recovered first. "Do that again." Louisa looked at him. "I did nothing." The whistle, his eyes fixed upon the bone toggle at her side. "Sound it properly." "No." The refusal left her before caution could soften it. Lady Camilla's brows lifted. One of the buyers gave a disapproving cough. Neville stepped closer. "Miss Kelland, that horse has endangered 3 men this morning. If you possess a means of controlling him, you will use it. A familiar response is not control. Then prove it was familiar by frightening him again so you can observe whether he calms." Neville's face hardened. "You exceed your commission." "No," Dominic said. He had reached the yard floor without Louisa noticing. "Mr. Peverell exceeds his." The Duke crossed to the rail and looked first at the horse, then at the twitch in the handler's hand. "Remove that." "Your Grace, he is valuable." "Then treat him as though his value extends beyond what he may earn." The handler lowered the device. Dominic turned to Tolland. "Clear the buyers from the rail. Put one Rookhaven groom at the enclosure, not one of Mr. Peverell's men. The horse is withdrawn from today's preview." Shock moved through the gathering. Neville's complexion changed. "Withdrawn. For the day. Subscriptions have been promised. No subscription is improved by a broken groom or a distressed stallion." Dominic looked toward the men lingering near the rail. "The preview is concluded." No one argued with him directly. They dispersed in clusters, taking their disappointment and speculation toward the upper yard. Lady Camilla remained long enough to study Louisa, not with curiosity, but with the cold attention of someone identifying a new inconvenience. "Kelland horses were dispersed years ago," she said. "Nearly 5, Louisa replied. Camilla's gaze dropped to the whistle. Then memory has had ample time to become imaginative. She followed Neville from the yard before Dominic could answer. Louisa wished she had left with them. Remaining meant questions. Questions meant hope, and hope had once cost her family more than it could afford. Dominic stopped several feet away, giving her space no one else had thought necessary. "Did you intend to call the horse?" he asked. "No." "Has he heard that whistle before?" "I don't know." "What did you observe?" The precision of the question steadied her. He did not ask what she believed. He asked what she had seen. Louisa looked past him to the stallion. The neutral groom had taken the lead and allowed it to hang loose. The horse stood tense, but no longer fought. "Paired whirls beneath the forelock," she said, a small white fleck inside the right heel. He turned toward 3 notes and followed my movement for 2 steps. Anything else? The way he raises his head when the lead is shortened. Dominic watched the horse repeat the exact motion as the groom adjusted his grip, though the man immediately loosened it again. You knew another animal with those marks? I knew a black colt bred at my father's stud. His name? Louisa's throat tightened. Kestrel. How long since you saw him? Since the stud was dispersed in late 1812. Dominic did not declare the matter solved. He did not glance toward the departing buyers, as though calculating what a mystery might add to the price. What would you need to determine whether this is the same horse? Time, a proper examination. Records that do not belong to me. Do such records exist? They may. And what do you want now? The question startled her more than his authority had. Want? You may leave. No one will prevent you. Or you may remain and place only what you choose into a written record. I will not ask you to perform with the whistle. The stallion shifted beneath the shelter, one dark ear still turned toward her. Louisa felt the worn bone knock once against the brass clasp. Everyone in the yard had wanted something from the animal. Stillness, profit, obedience, a story to repeat at dinner. Dominic was the first man who had asked what she wanted. Louisa lifted her eyes to his. I want no one to call recognition proof. Agreed, and no one touches that whistle. Agreed. She looked again at the paired whorls, the pale mark near the heel, and the watchful black eye that had followed her through almost 5 years of absence. The name escaped her in a whisper too soft to serve as evidence and too old to be a guess. Kestrel. The next morning, the north enclosure at Rookhaven Park held none of the noise that had surrounded the private preview. Mist clung low over the paddocks, and the flagstones beneath the covered gallery were still dark from the night air. Kestrel stood at the far side of the enclosure with a neutral Rookhaven groom, holding the lead loosely enough that it curved between them. Jasper Tolland remained near the gate. Mr. Owen Price waited beside a narrow table with his notebook and instruments. Mrs. Webb sat beneath the gallery within sight of Louisa, her gloved hands folded over the head of her walking stick. Neville Peverell stood apart from them all, immaculate in a dark riding coat and visibly displeased that any examination was occurring without one of his own handlers controlling it. Dominic had ordered the arrangement before breakfast. No crowd, no buyers, no forced display. Louisa stood outside the rail with her sketch case against her hip. The bone whistle remained tied to the worn cord at the clasp. She had not touched it since the word kestrel escaped her the previous afternoon. Begin with what can be observed, Dominic said. His tone carried across the quiet yard without disturbing the horse. Not what anyone hopes to prove. Neville gave a short breath through his nose. We are examining a 6-year-old stallion whose identity has already been entered and witnessed. Price opened his notebook, then an examination should support the entry. Louisa looked at the black horse. He watched the neutral groom closely, but he no longer fought the lead. Every time the man shifted his hands, Kestrel raised his head and prepared to retreat. The groom noticed and softened his grip. The horse settled by a fraction. Dominic turned to Louisa. You said he was bred at your father's stud. A black colt was born there in the spring of 1810. You saw him from birth, within the first hour. She kept her voice level. His dam was night glass, a black mare with a narrow white mark beneath the near fetlock. The colt had no blaze or stocking, only a small pale fleck inside the right heel and 2 whorls close together beneath the forelock. Price wrote without looking up. Anything else? When a lead was shortened suddenly, he lifted his head before he pulled away. He learned that from a groom who mistook speed for confidence. Neville's gaze sharpened. Many horses raise their heads when checked. Yes, Louisa said. That is why it cannot identify him. Dominic's attention remained on her. When did you last see Kestrel? Late in 1812, when the Kelland stud was dispersed. And before that, I drew him as a yearling in 1811. I also made several smaller studies while he was growing. Do you possess them? No. The commissioned drawing may have remained with the engraver. I do not know whether it survived. Neville folded his arms. Then we have a memory, not a record. At present, Louisa replied, we have physical observations, a remembered correspondence, and the possibility of an independent record. Those are not the same thing. Dominic looked toward the whistle against her case. Will you use it once? Louisa felt every person in the enclosure become still. Only once. No one moves toward him before, during, or after the call. Agreed. Dominic glanced around the yard. No one moves. Neville opened his mouth. Dominic did not raise his voice. That includes you, Mr. Peverell. Louisa untied nothing. She lifted the whistle only far enough to bring it to her lips, while the cord remained fastened to the case. The bone felt cool. For a moment, she remembered her father shaping the 3 notes beneath a younger autumn sky. She breathed once and sounded them. The first was low. The second rose. The third fell softly away. Kestrel's head came up. He turned toward her at once. The neutral groom did not alter the lead. The stallion took one step, then another, and stopped when Louisa lowered the whistle. She returned it to the clasp without calling again. He came to the sound, Neville said. He came 2 steps, Louisa corrected, and stopped when the sound stopped. Because he recognized you, perhaps. Or the notes, or a similar whistle. The response is familiar, but familiarity is not identity. Price entered the enclosure only after the horse had settled. He approached from the shoulder instead of the front, waited until Kestrel accepted his nearness, then examined the mouth, jaw, eyes, legs, and general development. He asked the groom to ease the lead twice. Each time the stallion's tension reduced. Neville watched the procedure as though patience itself were an accusation. At last Price stepped back and wrote several lines before speaking. My estimate is 7 years. An estimate, Neville said immediately. Yes. Price closed the horse's mouth gently. Teeth are not a parish register. Nevertheless, I would not describe this animal as 6. Growth varies. It does. Even so, 6 is improbable. A breeder who had lingered near the lower arch, despite Dominic's order, gave a thin laugh. We are allowing an illustrator's childhood fancy to disrupt a valuable sale because a difficult stallion followed a trinket. Dominic turned toward him. Which observation do you dispute? The man blinked. Your Grace? The paired whorls? The heel mark? The age estimate? The response to the whistle? Miss Kelland has called none of them proof. Which fact have you found false? The breeder glanced toward Neville, then at the horse. I only meant that imagination can shape memory. Then dispute her memory when it is offered as proof. It has not been. The man murmured an apology and withdrew beneath the arch. Louisa lowered her eyes to the folio in her hands. She was accustomed to being defended through kindness, which often carried the suggestion that kindness was needed because merit could not stand alone. Dominic had done something different. He had required the man to answer her facts. A sudden gust entered the enclosure and caught the loosened cover of her folio. Louisa reached for it at the same moment Dominic did. Their knuckles brushed over the leather edge. Both stopped. The contact was slight, barely more than warmth through gloves, yet awareness passed between them with startling clarity. Louisa withdrew first and secured the cover. Dominic released it without comment, though his gaze held hers for one measured beat before returning to the enclosure. "You had begun a study yesterday," he said. Before the whistle sounded, "Yes." "Did it include the markings?" Louisa opened to the charcoal page. The near foreleg had been stained by spilled coffee, but the head remained intact. Beneath the forelock, she had drawn the paired whorls before anyone knew they might matter. The line of the right hind leg was unfinished, but the heel was turned enough to show where the pale fleck lay. "I drew what I could see," she said, "before I spoke his name." Price studied the page without touching it. "The whorls are clear." Neville gave a dismissive shrug. "A black horse with 2 whorls is hardly a miracle." "No," Louisa said. "It is one correspondence." She closed the folio and looked toward the outer rail. The polished stall plate fixed there had been placed slightly crooked, as though one set of holes had not quite suited the present position. "Sovry IGN" appeared in black varnish across the face. At the lower edge, where a chip had broken away, a narrow line of blue enamel showed beneath it. Louisa moved closer, but kept her hands behind her back. "Has that plate been repainted?" Dominic asked. Neville followed her gaze. "Stable plates are repainted constantly." "The color may be ordinary," Louisa said. "The holes are not." 2 sets of rivet marks were visible, one newer and one older, offset by less than an inch. "It has been mounted in 2 positions." Toland stepped nearer. "Or on 2 rails, possibly." Louisa leaned just enough to study the chipped edge. No one should scrape it now. Neville's expression changed. "Why not?" "Because scraping could destroy the order of the layers. If there is older lettering beneath, the black, careless removal would make it impossible to prove which surface came first." Dominic looked to Toland. "The plate remains where it is until tomorrow morning." He turned to his steward. "Place a Rookhaven groom at this enclosure through the night. Record every person who enters. At 10 tomorrow, the plate will be removed under witnesses with clean tools. No polish, no solvent, no scraping." Neville stepped forward. "That plate belongs to the Peverell interest. Then your interest will benefit from its condition being recorded before anyone alters it." Dominic's gaze did not leave his. "You may attend. You may also bring a solicitor." Kestrel shifted beneath the shelter. The neutral groom gave him room, and the stallion lowered his head by an inch. Louisa touched the clasp of her sketch case, feeling the bone whistle resting against it. Yesterday, she had carried only recognition and a name she scarcely dared to speak. This morning, the mystery had acquired an age, a drawing made before suspicion existed, and a copper surface hiding blue beneath black. Somewhere under the word sovereign, another history might be waiting. By 10 o'clock on the morning of the 8th of October, the north enclosure at Rookhaven Park had become quieter than a chapel, and twice as carefully watched. The copper stall plate remained fixed to the outer rail exactly where Louisa had seen it the previous day, its black varnish carrying the name Sovry, while a thin crescent of blue enamel showed beneath the chipped lower edge. Kestrel stood in the adjoining enclosure under the eye of a neutral Rookhaven groom, the lead, hanging loose enough that the horse could lower his head without feeling trapped. Louisa remained outside the rail beside Mrs. Webb. Mr. Owen Price stood near the gate with his notebook. Jasper Toland, the Rookhaven steward, Dominic's solicitor, and the clerk who carried the dispatch box waited around a narrow table covered with clean linen. Neville Peveril had brought a solicitor of his own, a narrow-faced man who inspected every tool before allowing the stablemen to place them within reach. Lady Camilla watched from the covered gallery above, one gloved hand resting against the stone balustrade. Dominic arrived last. He greeted no one beyond what courtesy required. "Before the plate is touched," he said, "the condition must be read aloud and agreed by every interest represented here." His solicitor unfolded a memorandum. "The copper plate remains fixed to the outer rail of the north enclosure. Its visible face bears black varnish and the name Sovereign. Blue enamel is visible beneath a chip at the lower edge. 2 sets of rivet holes appear upon inspection. No scraping, polishing, solvent, heat, rubbing, or chemical preparation has been used." He looked first to Louisa. "Does that describe what you observed yesterday?" "Yes." Price, Tolland, and the steward answered in turn. Neville's solicitor stepped close enough to examine the chip without touching it. "The earlier holes are visible," he said. "Their purpose is not established." "Then that distinction will be recorded," Louisa replied. The man looked at her with mild surprise, perhaps because she had not tried to claim more. Neville waited until every other voice had agreed. "It describes the surface." Dominic inclined his head toward the stablemen. "Proceed." One man steadied the rail while the other used a clean, narrow punch to loosen the newer rivets. The first came free with a dry metallic sound. Kestrel raised his head in the adjoining enclosure, but the neutral groom did not shorten the lead. The second rivet resisted for several moments before slipping loose. When the plate was lifted away, the older mounting holes became clearer. 2 dark circles lay beneath the newer position, offset by less than an inch. Wear on the back of the copper showed that both sets had once held the plate against wood. Tolland leaned nearer. "Mounted twice, or moved once during ordinary repair," Neville said. Louisa studied the exposed back. "Both remain possible." Neville turned toward her sharply, as though fairness from her were more dangerous than accusation. Dominic looked from the holes to the black surface. "What can be said with certainty?" Louisa stepped closer to the chalk line drawn around the table, but did not cross it. The plate was fixed in one position before it was fixed in the present one. The black surface lies over blue enamel at the chipped edge. Nothing visible tells us whether the older blue carries lettering. "So it may carry none," Neville said. "Yes, and the difference may be meaningless." "It may." Louisa kept her hands folded behind her. "Meaninglessness is not proved by possibility any more than identity is proved by resemblance." Dominic's mouth shifted faintly. His gaze moved to the stallion's left hind leg, where Price had noted the old quarter line that morning. The scar, the age, the plate, the whistle. Taken together, they are proof. He stopped before Louisa could answer. A brief silence followed. "No," he corrected himself. "One correspondence after another. Still not proof." Louisa met his eyes. The private smile that passed between them lasted no more than a breath, but it changed the air between them. He had remembered not merely her words, but the discipline behind them. She answered with the smallest curve of her own mouth before looking back at the copper. Dominic's solicitor placed the plate face upward upon the linen. He measured it, described the edges, and noted the positions of both sets of holes. Louisa added one observation. "There is no fresh scoring around the exposed blue." "Meaning?" the Peveril solicitor asked. "Meaning yesterday's chip was not created during removal this morning." He considered the sentence, then nodded. "Record it exactly so." The solicitor wrote Louisa's words beneath a new heading, Observations supplied by Miss Louisa Kelland. The sight of her full name at the top of an official page struck more deeply than praise would have done. No one had shortened her to the artist. No one had placed Dominic's title before her skill. The memorandum attributed each statement to the person who had made it. Price's age estimate remained in his name. Tolland's description of the mounting remained in his. Louisa's observations belonged to her. The plate was covered with a second layer of linen, wrapped in stout paper and tied securely with tape. Dominic's solicitor pressed red wax across the crossing knot and set his signet into it. Tolland signed one folded edge. Price signed another. Louisa signed beneath them. Neville hesitated when the pen reached him. His solicitor spoke quietly. "Your signature confirms condition, not ownership or identity." Neville took the pen and wrote his name across the lower fold. The Peverell solicitor added his signature beside it. Dominic signed last. His solicitor then read the custody clause. "The sealed package will be placed in my locked dispatch box and remain at Rookhaven until either public examination or witnessed transfer. Any transfer must include verification of the wax, signatures, box condition, date, key, and receiving custodian. The receiving solicitor must be independent and accepted in writing by both the Caverton and Peverell interests. No examination, rubbing, copying of the surface, or opening of the wrapper may occur without named witnesses and a written record." Neville's solicitor reviewed the wording, accepted by both interests, not merely selected by His Grace. "That is what the clause states," Dominic replied. "Then I have no objection." Louisa watched the package placed inside the black dispatch box. The clerk turned the key, withdrew it, and held it up while the time was entered. He would keep the key. Dominic's solicitor would retain the box in the temporary estate office. The clerk carried it away within sight of every witness. No one followed him. Only after the office door closed did the attention in the yard return to the horse. Price opened his notebook. "My estimate remains approximately 7 years. I entered it yesterday before being shown any family history beyond Miss Kelland's statement that the horse she remembered was born in 1810. Neville's solicitor asked, "Would you identify this animal as that horse?" "No, I would identify him as a black stallion of approximately 7 years with the observed marks and scar. Nothing more than I can support." Tolland cleared his throat. "There is another fact that should be entered." Dominic turned toward him. "Speak. Since the stallion arrived, Mr. Peverell's men have refused to let Rookhaven grooms dress him, lift his feet, or change his halter unless one of their handlers stood beside them. At first I took it for caution with a difficult animal." Neville's expression hardened. "My handlers know him. Rookhaven grooms know how to brush a horse," Tolland replied, "and how to read a shoe. You imply concealment. I state a restriction." Dominic looked to the solicitor. "Record Mr. Tolland's statement in his own words." Lady Camilla descended from the gallery before the pen stopped moving. Her grey-green skirts made little sound against the steps. "Every hour this continues damages Rookhaven as much as Peverell," she said. "Subscribers will remember uncertainty long after they forget why it began." Dominic faced her. "A sound pedigree survives examination. And if the examination is guided by Miss Kelland's memory, it is guided by named observations, dated entries, and witnesses." Camilla's gaze moved to Louisa. "How official you have become. Only where the facts are concerned. And if the facts fail to give you what you hope, then they will still be facts." Camilla's expression cooled. Dominic said nothing for Louisa. He allowed her answer to stand without placing his authority over it. That restraint warmed her more than defense. His solicitor handed Louisa a clean copy of the memorandum. She folded it and placed it inside her sketch case beside the bone whistle. The movement stirred a memory of a narrow Newmarket shop, copper dust on a counter, and Elias Rook bending over a plate, while a much younger Louisa corrected the angle of a yearling's foreleg. Her father had failed to pay the final installment, but Rook disliked destroying unfinished work. He kept proofs, rejected drawings, and abandoned commissions in shallow drawers for years. Louisa looked toward Dominic. There may be an earlier likeness. His attention sharpened. Where, with an engraver in Newmarket, Elias Rook, if he kept the Kelland commission, the original drawing would show Kestrel in 1811, before the stud was dispersed. Neville's face went very still. Camilla's fingers tightened around the handle of her parasol. Dominic noticed both reactions. Then tomorrow, he said, we begin with Mr. Rook. A messenger from Newmarket reached Rookhaven shortly, after breakfast on the 9th of October, with word that Elias Rook had been called to Cambridge over a damaged engraving plate, and would not return until late that evening. He could receive visitors at 10 the next morning, no earlier. Dominic read the note once, folded it, and accepted the delay with a restraint Louisa suspected cost him more than he wished anyone to see. Then we use the day, he said. By 9, they stood beside the north enclosure, while Mrs. Webb sat beneath the covered gallery within sight of them. The sealed copper plate remained inside the locked black dispatch box in the temporary estate office. Dominic's solicitor retained the box. His clerk retained the key. The wax and signatures had not been disturbed. On the rail, only the 2 sets of holes and a faint blue line remained where the plate had rested. Kestrel stood in the adjoining enclosure with the neutral groom nearby. No one had asked the horse to approach. He watched Louisa whenever she moved, but he no longer paced the fence. You, said Mr. Noakes treated the quarter crack before the stud was dispersed. Dominic said. Louisa rested her gloved hand on the upper rail. In the autumn of 1812. The corrective shoeing continued for 6 weeks. By the time the creditors came, the damaged line had begun to grow down cleanly. You remember the timing exactly. Dept teaches a household to remember dates. She looked across the enclosure. Every appointment becomes another day before something is taken. Dominic did not fill the silence with comfort she had not requested. Kestrel shifted beneath the shelter, his left hind resting lightly. My father was not careless with horses, Louisa continued. He could tell which mare had gone off her oats before any groom noticed. He knew pedigrees 3 generations back. He simply believed another good season would repair every poor one. Hope can become an expensive habit, especially when other people depend upon it. Dominic's gaze moved to her face. You were angry with him. I was. The admission came without heat, but not without pain. And I loved him. Those facts did not cancel each other. The bone whistle tapped softly against the clasp of her sketch case when she shifted. He carved this from an old harnessed toggle because I could never make a proper call with my fingers. Kestrel learned the 3 notes before he learned to stand for the farrier. Dominic looked at the whistle, but did not reach toward it. What happened on the day Kestrel was sold? Louisa's hand tightened on the rail. The yard before her blurred into another yard, one filled with creditors, cold breath, and men discussing horses in the same tones they used for timber and grain. They came before breakfast. Two waited near the mounting block, while another searched the account room. They spoke about bloodlines as though years of breeding and care could be reduced to a column before luncheon. She kept her eyes on Kestrel. My father entered the yard with the whistle in his hand. He gave the call. Kestrel crossed to him at once. Then the sale groom took the lead. Kestrel resisted him. Her throat tightened. My father sounded the whistle again, and Kestrel followed that man through the gate. Dominic's face hardened with quiet understanding. Why call him if he was being taken? Because everyone else would have forced him. Louisa drew a slow breath. My father used the trust between them to make the departure gentler. You did not see it that way then? No. I thought he had betrayed the horse. I hated him for it, before the cart reached the road. She turned the worn whistle once between her fingers without lifting it. Years later, I understood that he used the last authority he possessed to spare Kestrel fear. Understanding did not make it hurt less. Louisa looked at Dominic. No, it only gave the pain a shape I could live beside. He lowered his gaze to the older rivet marks in the rail. My father was called gentle because he delayed every decision that might make him disliked. He postponed repairs because decay embarrassed him. He retained dishonest men because dismissing them required confrontation. He delayed payment until tradesmen stopped asking politely. His voice remained controlled, though something beneath it had opened. After he died, I learned how many people had paid for his gentleness. So you became the opposite. I tried. You choose quickly. You dismiss quickly. You make uncertainty invisible. It repaired much of Caverton. I do not doubt it. Louisa faced him fully. That is what makes a useful habit dangerous. Success can persuade a man that the habit is also a virtue. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but attention. You think decisiveness is a fault? No, I think speed can make a wrong conclusion sound authoritative. The words settled between them. Dominic looked toward Kestrel, who had raised his head when the groom adjusted his stance, but had not retreated. You believe I want to decide this horse's identity too quickly. I believe you want the right answer quickly. Is that different? Very. She nodded towards the estate office, where the sealed evidence remained beyond both their reach. A man who wants an answer may wait for evidence. A man who wants to be right begins arranging the evidence around himself. Dominic turned away for a moment. The reaction was not dismissal. It was the stillness of a man allowing a truth to reach a pride had guarded. When he looked back, some of the certainty had left his expression. My father's hesitation made every room feel unsafe, he said. I learned to choose before anyone else discovered I was uncertain. Louisa had expected defense. The admission changed the air between them. Perhaps you have allowed the shame of a dead man to set the pace of a living one. A breath escaped him, almost laughter and almost pain. You have a ruthless way of making compassion sound precise. Imperation would not help you. No. His gaze lowered to her hand, nor would flattery. Louisa shifted her glove against the rail and felt a rough patch beneath the leather. When she lifted her hand, a faint blue stain marked the palm. She removed the glove and brushed the wood lightly with her bare thumb. A brighter trace of old enamel appeared against her skin. Dominic stepped nearer, then stopped before entering her space. May I see? The question was quiet. Louisa looked at his open hand, then at his face. Nothing in his posture assumed permission. She placed her hand in his. Dominic turned her palm upward beneath the morning light, supporting her fingers without closing around them. His thumb hovered near the blue residue, but did not touch her skin. The contact was practical, yet awareness moved through Louisa with a force that had nothing to do with paint. His hand was warm. More striking than the warmth was his restraint. "The residue is dry," he said. "Old enough that yesterday's removal did not create it. Likely. Still not proof." Louisa looked up. The faint smile in his eyes answered the correction he had made for himself the previous morning. "One correspondence," she said. "I am learning." For one suspended moment, neither moved. Then Dominic released her first. Louisa curled her fingers around the blue mark, as though the brief warmth remained there. From the gallery, Lady Camilla Peverell stood partly concealed behind a stone pillar. She had seen the offered hand, Louisa's acceptance, and the Duke's attention fixed not upon spectacle, but upon the woman everyone else had ignored. Later, in the morning room assigned to the Peverell party, Camilla closed the door behind Neville. "Caverton's interest is no longer confined to the horse," she said. Neville poured himself a measure of brandy despite the hour. "Interest can be made embarrassing. Not while he believes he is defending integrity." Camilla removed her gloves one finger at a time. "We must separate Miss Kelland's credibility from every fact she presents. Rook may have the drawing. Noakes may have the ledger. Then we do not argue with their records. We question why she needs them to mean this horse." Camilla crossed to the writing desk. Her father did not lose the stud through weather or simple misfortune. There were bonds, advances, unpaid, notes. Most were settled at dispersal. Most is not all. She looked through the window toward the north enclosure, where Louisa still stood near the rail, and Dominic had chosen not to touch her. Again, find every surviving Kelland debt instrument before Caverton reaches Rook. If Miss Kelland claims a valuable stallion once attached to her family, society must first be reminded what her family owed ours. The road to Newmarket still held the silver damp of morning when the closed carriage left Rookhaven Park on the 10th of October. Mrs. Webb sat beside Louisa with her hands folded over a dark wool reticule, while Dominic occupied the forward seat opposite them. The sealed copper plate remained at Rookhaven inside the locked black dispatch box under his solicitor's custody, with the key still held by the clerk who had witnessed the sealing. Louisa had asked for that fact to be entered before they departed. Dominic had not taken offense. He had simply ordered the memorandum updated. The bone whistle rested against the clasp of her sketch case, its worn cord secure. "You're certain, mister, Rook may still have the drawing?" Dominic asked after the carriage passed the final line of elms. "Certain is too generous," Louisa replied. He disliked destroying unfinished work, even when customers failed to pay. "Your father failed to pay the final account?" "Yes." She looked through the window at hedges blurred by motion. By then, every unpaid account had begun waiting behind every other. Dominic did not offer pity large enough to make the admission feel smaller. Then we ask what survived. Elias Rook's shop stood in a narrow Newmarket street between a saddler and a stationer. Sporting prints crowded the window, their horses made noble by distance and expensive framing. Rook himself was 61, spare of build, with silver hair tied carelessly at the nape and black ink settled into the lines of his fingers. He recognized Louisa before Dominic's title could be fully announced. "Miss Kelland," he said, peering over his spectacles. "You were the girl who corrected the near foreleg 3 times." "It was wrong twice," Louisa replied. Rook's mouth twitched. "And still wrong on the proof your father approved." He led them through the public room into a rear workshop where shallow drawers lined one wall from floor to ceiling. Mrs. Webb remained close, while Dominic stopped beside the work table rather than taking the only chair. Rook opened a thick ledger and turned through several years of entries. Here, he tapped a line dated 1811. One yearling study. Black colt. Preparatory drawing supplied. Copper plate begun and held for want of final payment. Louisa's breath caught at the year, though she had expected it. Seeing the date in another man's hand made memory heavier and more real. Rook unlocked a drawer and lifted out a portfolio wrapped in grey paper. He laid the original drawing beneath the north window. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, but the figure remained clear. Kestrel stood in profile at 1 year old, all narrow legs, alert ears, and unfinished strength. Beneath the forelock, the paired whorls curved close together. A smaller study chai at the margin showed the pale fleck inside the right heel. The left hind leg carried the same slight irregularity. Louisa had seen before the quarter crack, developed the following autumn. At the bottom, beneath the forehoof, her signature remained dark and precise. L. Kelland. For several moments, Louisa could not speak. The drawing had survived debt, dispersal, and nearly 6 years in a drawer no creditor had bothered to search. More than the horse had endured. Her name had endured with him. Dominic leaned nearer, then stopped before touching the paper. "Your father's portrait?" he said quietly. Rook looked at him. "Her drawing, Your Grace. Mr. Kelland commissioned it. A patron pays for a likeness. He doesn't thereby acquire the eye that made it." Dominic's expression changed without defensiveness. "You're right, Miss Kelland's drawing." The correction was immediate and unadorned. Louisa lowered her gaze before gratitude became visible enough to embarrass her. Rookie brought out the unfinished engraving plate next. Its etched outline matched the drawing, though the shoulder remained incomplete, and the background had never been worked. "These remain with me," he said. "The drawing, the account, and the plate." "They should," Louisa replied. "Would you present them before named witnesses if formally requested?" "I will. I won't send them in a carriage, and I won't place them in a duke's archive." Dominic inclined his head. "Nor will I ask you to." With Rook's permission, Louisa copied only the date, page number, and exact wording of the account. No original left the shop. Their second stop lay beyond the busiest streets, at a low forge where the air smelled of coal smoke, iron, and hoof pairings. Samuel Noakes remembered the Kelland name before Louisa had finished introducing herself. "Black Stallion with more sense than half the men who handled him," he said. "Quarter crack, left hind, autumn of 1812. He reached above the shoeing bench and brought down a ledger with a singed leather corner. The pages inside remained sound. Noakes found the entry without hesitation. Kestrel, Kelland stud, Black Stallion, corrective shoeing over 6 weeks. "Narrow shoe," he said. "Outer branch eased. He'd stand if you gave him time. Rush him, and he'd brace the whole leg." Dominic studied the written line from a respectful distance. Would the healed mark remain visible after 5 years? Likely. Not enough to name him by itself. Noakes closed the ledger halfway. "But I'd know where to look." "Will you examine the horse before witnesses?" Louisa asked. "If the horse is handled properly. That condition is mine as well." Noakes nodded once. "Then I'll come." Outside the forge, a Peveril groom stood near the opposite alehouse, holding a bay mare by the rein. He turned his face away too late when Louisa emerged. She recognized him from Rookhaven. So did Dominic. Neither confronted him. A confrontation would only confirm which records mattered most. By the time the carriage returned to the inn yard, Neville would know that both the 1811 drawing and the 1812 ledger still existed. A private parlour had been reserved for tea. Mrs. Webb accepted hers weak with milk. Louisa found her own cup already poured strong, without milk, with a slice of lemon resting beside the saucer. She looked at Dominic. "You remembered you left the milk untouched yesterday." Most people would have assumed I was distracted. Most people have been inattentive. The words were simple, yet they reached her with the quiet intimacy of being observed when she had not been useful, endangered, or publicly wronged. "Thank you," she said. His gaze held hers for one measured moment. "You're welcome." Hooves struck sharply in the yard below. A stable lad entered with mud on his boots and a folded note bearing Jasper Tolland's seal. Dominic broke it open. The change in his face came before the words. "What has happened?" Louisa asked. A Peverell carrier arrived at Rookhaven before noon. A wagon is being prepared at the north gate. Mrs. Webb set down her cup. "For the stallion?" "For the horse entered as sovereign." Dominic read the final lines, then folded the note with deliberate care. "The order says he is to be loaded before dawn." Louisa's hand closed around the warm cup. "Can Neville remove him?" "The horse is still Peverell property unless a formal dispute is lodged beyond my estate. Rookhaven can control its yard. It cannot invent ownership." "Then what will you do?" The old speed had not vanished from Dominic. She saw it gather in his posture. This time, however, it did not immediately become command. He looked first at Louisa, then at the copied records beside her hand. "We return now," he said. "I won't permit a valuable horse to be loaded in darkness from my estate without daylight inspection, a written acknowledgement of condition, and named witnesses. Will that stop them? It will stop them tonight." He rose. "After that, delay is all I can promise." Across the courtyard, the Peverell groom had disappeared. Miles away, Neville would soon know that an old drawing still carried Louisa's signature and that a farrier's ledger still remembered Kestrel's injured foot. The question was no longer whether the past had survived. It was whether the horse would remain within, reach long enough for the past to speak. The Peverell wagon left Rookhaven without the stallion shortly before dawn on the 11th of October, its wheels dark with mud and its driver furious after spending half the night beside a locked gate. Dominic had returned from Newmarket before midnight and refused to permit a valuable horse to be loaded in darkness from an enclosure under his authority. Neville had produced the carrier's order. Dominic had answered that no animal would leave Rookhaven without daylight inspection, a written acknowledgement of condition, and named witnesses to the loading. The argument had continued until even Neville understood that forcing the matter would create more suspicion than delay. By morning, the wagon was gone. The threat remained. Louisa stood outside the north enclosure with her folio open against the rail, while a neutral Rookhaven groom carried fresh water beneath the shelter. Kestrel watched the man enter. His neck tightened, and one hind foot shifted beneath him. But he did not retreat to the far corner. The groom set down the bucket without reaching for the halter. He crossed the enclosure again to spread hay, keeping his movements slow and his shoulders angled aside. Kestrel followed him with one dark eye. When the man stepped back, the stallion lowered his head and began to eat. Louisa caught the altered line of his neck in 3 strokes of charcoal. He allowed the groom to remain, Dominic said from several feet away. "For one morning. You won't call that progress." "I'll call it one morning." Dominic's mouth shifted faintly. "Your caution is becoming severe, only toward conclusions that arrive before their evidence. Then I deserve the severity. He did not ask the groom to bring Kestrel nearer. He did not propose another whistle test for the buyers, still waiting at the estate. That restraint eased something in Louisa more effectively than reassurance would have done. She added the lowered head to the page. Stillness is difficult to draw, Dominic said, only when one assumes nothing is happening. What is happening now? He is discovering that the man can enter without demanding anything. Dominic looked from the horse to Louisa. That seems a lesson larger than the enclosure. Perhaps. Mrs. Webb had taken a seat at the long work table in the open tack room adjoining the yard. She was sorting Louisa's loose studies into order, close enough for propriety and far enough to grant privacy without pretending it did not exist. The room smelled of leather, soap, and clean straw. Louisa carried her folio inside when the charcoal began to soften beneath her fingers. The bone whistle tapped once against the clasp of her sketch case. Dominic followed, but remained on the opposite side of the table. He looked toward the open doorway, where Kestrel still stood within sight. You said yesterday that your father called him twice on the day he was sold. Yes, Louisa untied nothing. She placed the sketch case upon the table and let the whistle rest beside it. The first call brought Kestrel across the yard. The second sent him through the gate behind another man. You were there for both, close enough to hear the creditors discussing which horses would bring the quickest money. Her finger traced the worn edge of the bone. Two waited by the mounting block. A third searched the account room. They spoke about breeding years as though they were spoiled grain. Dominic said nothing. The silence did not press her to continue, which made continuing possible. My father stood with Kestrel for several minutes before the sale groom took the lead. I expected him to call the horse back. That wasn't foolish. It was impossible. Those aren't the same thing. Louisa looked at him. He had not tried to improve the past. He had only refused to make hope contemptible. When Kestrel resisted the stranger, my father used the whistle again. The horse followed. My father never raised it after that. Did he explain why? Later. He said a frightened animal should not be forced to choose between trust and necessity. Her voice tightened despite her care. At the time, I thought he had used Kestrel's trust against him. And later I understood that he used the last authority he had to make the departure gentler. Louisa lowered her eyes to the whistle. Understanding did not make it hurt less. It merely gave the pain a shape I could live beside. Dominic rested one hand upon the edge of the table, then withdrew it as though even that small claim upon the space required thought. My father was called weak because he delayed every decision that might make him disliked. Men laughed at him privately. Some did it where I could hear. His voice remained controlled, but the control had changed. It no longer concealed certainty. It held something more vulnerable in place. After I inherited, I decided quickly because hesitation felt like resemblance, and quick decisions repaired much of Caverton. They did, which made the habit harder to question. Yes, he looked toward the yard. The neutral groom crossed the enclosure again, and Kestrel did not leave his hay. Last night, I wanted to order Neville off the estate, seize the horse, and settle the matter by force of title. For one moment, it felt like courage. What stopped you? Your voice saying speed can make a wrong conclusion sound authoritative. Louisa met his eyes. Decisiveness without patience can still be fear. Dominic absorbed the sentence without turning away. I don't know how to wait without feeling I have failed someone. The confession was quiet enough, that it seemed meant for no room larger than this one. Louisa looked at the man before her. Not the Duke who could silence a yard with a sentence, but the son who had built strength around an old humiliation. Then perhaps you must learn that waiting can also be protection. I am trying. He lifted his right hand and laid it open upon the table between them. He did not reach across the space. He did not ask her to comfort him. The offered hand simply waited. Louisa looked at it. His fingers were steady. His breathing was not. Mrs. Webb remained at the far end of the room, arranging drawings by size, and wisely ignoring the stillness that had entered the space. Louisa placed her hand in Dominic's. His fingers closed gently around hers, not tightly enough to prevent retreat, not possessively enough to turn trust into a claim. Warmth moved through her palm and settled beneath her ribs. Neither spoke for several breaths. "You don't owe me reassurance," Dominic said. "I know." "Then why?" "Because being understood should not become another debt." His thumb shifted once against the side of her hand. "And because you waited." A faint smile reached his eyes. "I could become fond of being rewarded for restraint. Then it would cease to be restraint. You are merciless, only precise." Their joined hands remained between them while they spoke of shame, inheritance, and the peculiar loneliness of being believed only after someone more powerful made belief respectable. Dominic admitted that praise had taught him to mistake command for protection. Louisa admitted that poverty had taught her to refuse help before she could discover whether it carried hidden terms. Outside, Kestrel moved beneath the shelter. The neutral groom passed close enough to refill the hay rack, and the stallion remained. At last, Louisa loosened her fingers. Dominic released her immediately. The absence of pressure stayed with her after the warmth was gone. Across the house, Lady Camilla Peverell opened a leather packet delivered from Redmarsh before breakfast. Neville stood beside the writing desk while she unfolded the original Kelland bond. Thomas Kelland's signature remained clear beneath the unpaid balance and the schedule attached to the stud's dispersal. "It's genuine," Neville said. "It doesn't transfer the horse to us. It doesn't need to." Camilla read the document again. "The public will see a debtor's daughter claiming valuable bloodstock once connected to her family. Caverton's attention will supply the rest. She has Rook and Noakes. Then we won't dispute their records. We'll dispute what she wants them to mean." Camilla folded the bond with exact care and placed it inside her writing case. Neville set a formal notice beside her. It required Rookhaven to release the stallion at first light on the 13th of October. Camilla signed as witness. Before noon, a footman carried the notice to Dominic. He read it in the open tack room while Louisa watched. The paper named the hour precisely. Another wagon would come, and this time as darkness would not be available as an objection. The long breakfast room at Rookhaven Park had been arranged to suggest that nothing important could happen there. Silver covers gleamed beneath the painted ceiling. Coffee steamed beside folded newspapers. Sporting prints hung between tall windows overlooking the stable roofs, where the black stallion remained under guard, and the notice clock continued toward morning. On the 12th of October, buyers, breeders, subscription men, and several neighboring families took their places at Dominic's table, with the alert politeness of people who had heard enough rumor to hope for scandal. Louisa sat near the lower end beside Mrs. Webb, her folio closed and the bone whistle still fastened to her sketch case. The sealed copper plate remained inside the locked black dispatch box in the temporary estate office. Dominic's solicitor retained the box. His clerk retained the key. Nothing about the evidence had changed since the signatures dried. Everything about the room had. Lady Camilla Peverell waited until the first course had been removed before speaking. "The delay has already damaged every subscription attached to Sovereign," she said. Her grey-green silk was severe enough to resemble mourning without admitting defeat. Gentlemen who came prepared to book mares now hesitate because Rookhaven has allowed private fancy to become public suspicion. Dominic stood at the head of the table with Neville's formal notice folded beside his plate. The Stallion was withdrawn pending examination. "That is not a declaration against his pedigree. Newmarket will not preserve the distinction," Neville said. "The Peverell interest will therefore remove the horse when the notice expires." A quiet passed along the table. Louisa saw Dominic's hand settle against the back of his chair. It was the stillness before decision, not the stillness of patience. "At first light tomorrow?" he asked. "At the hour stated," Neville replied. "The carrier will arrive before dawn and wait beyond the north gate. When the notice expires, the horse leaves. The copper plate remains sealed." "In your solicitor's box," Neville said. "Your inquiry may continue without our property standing in your yard." Dominic looked toward the windows as though he could see the empty space that would remain after Kestrel was gone. Camilla followed his gaze. "Unless Miss Kelland has already persuaded your grace that memory should outrank ownership." Several heads turned toward Louisa. She answered before Dominic could. "I've persuaded his grace of nothing. I have supplied observations and named independent records." "Yet the horse follows your whistle. A familiar response isn't proof of identity. How admirably careful." Camilla lifted her cup. "One might almost forget the animal once belonged to your father's stud. He did not belong to me, but he might become valuable to you if others accepted the claim." Mrs. Webb's fingers tightened around her napkin. Louisa kept her hands still in her lap. "My connection to the Kelland stud is precisely why I've refused to let memory stand alone." Neville leaned back. "And while Miss Kelland distinguishes memory from proof, our horse remains under ducal restraint. We have indulged this uncertainty long enough." "It will not require weeks," Dominic said. "Then state what you believe now," Neville replied. The challenge landed cleanly. The room waited. Louisa saw the old fear enter Dominic's face. If he waited, the horse might vanish before the evidence reached Newmarket. If he acted, he could hold the room long enough to protect the inquiry. Every instinct shaped by his father's failures urged him toward command. Louisa met his eyes. "Your Grace," she said quietly. The words carried everything they had spoken of in the tack room. Waiting could be protection. Speed could make a wrong conclusion sound authoritative. For one suspended beat, she believed he would remember. Then Dominic turned to the room. The Stallion entered as Sovereign may in fact be Kestrel, a horse bred at the former Kelland stud. Louisa's breath stopped. A murmur rose at once. Dominic continued before it could grow. Miss Kelland recognized physical markings, an age discrepancy, a response to an old whistle, and correspondences with records now secured through independent custodians. Until the matter is resolved, the sale remains suspended. Dominic. Her use of his Christian name vanished beneath the stir of voices, but he heard it. His gaze returned to her. Doubt appeared too late. Louisa rose slowly. "You said we would wait. If we wait until tomorrow, Neville removes him. Then you should have said that to me. You should not have announced my conclusion as though it were yours to release. I announced the danger. You announced me. The words stripped the room of its murmuring. Neville stood and opened the leather case beside his chair. "Then let us be complete." He withdrew a folded document bearing an old Kelland seal. Camilla accepted it with measured care and opened it upon the table. Louisa knew her father's signature before she saw the amount. "This is the original Kelland bond," Camilla said, "executed before the dispersal of the stud. The balance remains unpaid." She named the sum. It was large enough to alter the way people looked at Louisa. A breeder midway down the table glanced from the bond to Dominic. A lady near Camilla drew the catalogue away from Louisa's place, as though proximity had become indiscreet. One of the subscription men lowered his voice, but not enough. "Then Miss Kelland may be attempting to recover property lost through debt, or create value where grief left none," another replied. No one laughed. That made the humiliation cleaner. Louisa felt the old instinct to disappear press at the edges of her composure. She refused it. "The bond proves my father owed money," she said. "It does not prove this horse's identity, ownership, or present description." "No," Camilla replied. "It establishes motive." Dominic stepped forward. "Miss Kelland acts under my authority." The room went still. Louisa turned toward him. He heard the error as soon as it left him. "I mean that I stand behind her observations." "That is not what you said." "Then I will say it more clearly. I will guarantee her fee, her future commission, and every expense required to complete the inquiry." The offer fell into Camilla's trap more perfectly than any accusation could have done. A debtor's daughter, a duke's chosen expert, a valuable claim financed by the man who had publicly favored her. Dominic had meant to protect Louisa's credibility. Instead, he had sealed it beneath his title. She looked at him and felt the injury settle deeper than insult. He had believed her. That was what made it betrayal rather than disappointment. "Why did my truth require your ownership before it could be heard?" she asked. Dominic's face changed. "It doesn't. You have just placed it under your authority, guaranteed it with your money, and announced it before I consented. I was preventing the horse's removal. You were preventing uncertainty from continuing where you could not command it." His jaw tightened. "Louisa, I believed you." She held his gaze. "You believed me, Your Grace. You simply did not believe the truth could survive unless you possessed it first." He took one step toward her. Louisa stepped back. The small refusal stopped him more completely than a shouted rebuke. She opened her reticule, removed the unused portion of her catalogue advance, and placed it beside her untouched coffee. "I'm returning what I haven't earned. You needn't do that. I do." Her voice remained steady. "The completed drawings will be delivered. My observations are withdrawn from your private inquiry until I can present them independently and in my own name." "Louisa, not here, and not while you are still trying to turn apology into another decision." She took up her sketch case. The bone whistle tapped once against the clasp. Mrs. Webb rose beside her. Dominic did not offer his arm. Perhaps some part of him understood that the first useful thing he could do was allow her to leave. Louisa crossed the room while every person who had ignored her now watched. At the door, she paused and faced the table. "The bond is genuine. So are the drawing, the farrier's ledger, the age estimate, and the sealed plate. One truth does not erase another merely because it is more convenient." Then she walked out. During the night, the Peverell carrier waited beyond Rookhaven's north gate. When the notice hour arrived, Neville produced ownership papers and named Henshaw's Newmarket sale yard as the destination. Dominic required daylight inspection. A written record of the Stallion's condition and witnesses to the loading. He could not lawfully seize another man's horse merely because he feared what might happen next. Kestrel was led into the wagon under neutral observation and carried away before the morning mist had lifted. At first light on the 13th of October, Louisa's hired chaise rolled from Rookhaven with Mrs. Webb beside her. She did not look back. Behind the stable roofs, the north enclosure stood empty. The hired chaise reached Newmarket shortly after 8 on the morning of the 13th of October, with mist still caught between the stable roofs and the bone whistle tapping softly against the clasp of Louisa's sketch case. Mrs. Webb sat beside her in silence until the carriage turned into the narrow street where their lodgings stood above a widow's millinery rooms. Only then did she say, "You haven't looked back once." Louisa kept her eyes on the brick fronts passing the window. Looking back wouldn't return the horse, nor the trust. Louisa's hand tightened around the case handle. No. The answer hurt more in daylight than it had in the breakfast room. Dominic had believed her. That was precisely why the injury cut so deeply. He had not dismissed her observations. He had taken them, wrapped them in his title, and spoken before she had consented. By the time the chaise stopped, Louisa had decided that grief would not be the next force permitted to direct her. She climbed down without assistance and carried her own sketch case upstairs. A Caverton footman arrived within half an hour, bearing a sealed note and an offer of servants, horses, and rooms at a private inn. Louise read only enough to understand the offer. "Tell His Grace that Mrs. Webb and I have suitable lodgings," she said. "I won't require Caverton servants or money." The footman hesitated. "His Grace asked me to remain available." Then remain available to him. Her tone was not cruel. It was final. When he had gone, Louisa removed her gloves and laid a clean sheet of foolscap upon the table. The charcoal stain at the edge of her thumb remained from the last study she had made beside Kestrel. It lay near the place. Dominic had once supported her hand beneath the light. Memory tried to return with the warmth of his palm. Louisa closed her fingers until the thought passed. Pain would be acknowledged. It would not write the next sentence for her. "What will you do first?" Mrs. Webb asked. "Make it impossible for Mr. Henshaw to say no one warned him." Louisa dipped the pen. She wrote that the black stallion, delivered from Rookhaven under the name Sovereign, was of disputed description. She listed the apparent age, inconsistency, the paired forehead whorls, the pale fleck inside the right heel, the heeled left hind quarter line, the response to a 3-note Kelland whistle, and the removed copper plate bearing later black varnish over visible blue enamel. She named Elias Rouquet, Samuel Noakes, Mr. Owen Price, Jasper Tolland, Dominic's solicitor, and the Peverell solicitor who had signed the plate memorandum. She stated that the plate remained sealed at Rookhaven inside a locked dispatch box and that no opening had occurred. She did not claim ownership. She did not call the horse Kestrel as fact. At the bottom she signed her full name, Miss Louisa Kelland. Mrs. Webb read the document once. "It sounds colder than you feel. That is its purpose." Henshaw's public sale yard stood beyond the busiest part of Newmarket, a broad arrangement of brick offices, covered passages, stalls, and a central ring where voices carried farther than truth sometimes did. Mr. Henshaw was a square-built man with a careful manner, and the wary eyes of someone whose reputation depended upon refusing both panic and concealment. He received Louisa in his office with Mrs. Webb beside her and read the notice twice. "Mr. Peverell says the Stallion is to be offered privately this afternoon," he said. Then my notice has arrived before the sale. You hold no bill of sale. I haven't claimed the horse. You dispute the lot's description. Yes. Henshaw looked down the list of observations. Does the Duke of Casterleigh stand behind this? Louisa met his gaze. His Grace has an interest in the matter. This objection is mine. The distinction made him pause, and the originals. They remain with their custodians. Mr. Rook has the 1811 drawing, account, and unfinished engraving plate. Mr. Noakes has his 1812 ledger. Mr. Price has his notebook. The copper plate remains sealed at Rookhaven under the memorandum signed by both Caverton and Peverell interests. Will the men appear? I intend to ask them. Henshaw folded the notice along its existing crease. I won't put a disputed lot under my hammer while named witnesses can be produced, nor will I allow my yard to be used for a private removal before I have recorded the horse's condition and the objection lodged against his description. How long will you withhold him? Long enough to hear those witnesses. Not long enough for anyone to call this confiscation. He rang for his clerk. Place the stallion under a neutral keeper. No Peverell handler enters without Mr. Tolland's written condition record and one of my men present. Louisa felt relief, but no triumph. Henshaw had not believed her. He had done something more useful. He had created time. From the yard, Louisa went first to Elias Rook. The engraver agreed to bring the original 1811 drawing, his account ledger, and the unfinished engraving plate in person when formally summoned. Samuel Noakes made the same promise regarding his ledger, and insisted that the horse be handled without haste. By noon, both men had signed brief acknowledgments that the original records remained in their possession and had not been given to Louisa, Dominic, or any Peverell agent. Rooker then remembered an old Peverell route notice among a stack of discarded sporting sheets. He found it folded inside a drawer beneath advertisements for stallion seasons and horse transport. The notice recorded an April transfer through the White Hart, several miles outside Newmarket, before the party continued towards Suffolk. Why does that matter? Mrs. Webb asked. Louisa studied the date. Because, if Sovereign travelled this road in April, someone at the inn may remember him. They could not reach the White Hart and return before dusk with any hope of finding records properly. Louisa refused to turn inquiry into haste merely because haste had harmed her before. She and Mrs. Webb went at first light on the 14th in another hired chaise. The innkeeper remembered the party before Louisa finished naming the month. Black Stallion, he said. Fine animal. Taken ill before departure. What name did the handler use? Louisa asked. Sovereign. Kept saying a horse with that name ought not die in a stable meant for hired hacks. Mrs. Webb's hand closed over the top of her reticule. Louisa kept her voice steady. Did he die? Before dawn. A veterinary surgeon came from the next village and stayed through the night. The local surgeon still held the account book. He would not surrender it, and Louisa did not ask him to. Under his eye, she read the April entry recording treatment for severe colic, attendance through the night and burial expense for a black stallion identified by the Peverell handler as Sovereign. Payment had been made in cash by Neville Peverell. The innkeeper confirmed that Neville had instructed the staff not to speak of the death until the Peverell party had left. He said subscriptions were in play, the man added, and panic would injure innocent gentlemen. Louisa copied only the date, amount, page number, and exact wording of the identification. The account book remained with the surgeon. The inn register remained with the innkeeper. On the return journey, the sequence formed with terrible clarity. Sovereign had died in April. 5 weeks later, a 7-year-old black stallion from the former Kelland stud might have entered Peverell hands. The altered age, repainted plate, restricted grooming, and hurried removals no longer stood as isolated irregularities. They began to point in the same direction. Dusk was gathering when the shay returned to Henshaw's yard. Louisa saw the private wagon before the wheels stopped. Neville stood beneath the arch with 2 carriers, while Kestrel waited in the passage beyond under a travel blanket. Henshaw blocked the way, Louisa's written notice folded in one hand. "The horse leaves now," Neville said. "He does not leave through my yard tonight," Henshaw replied. "I won't offer him under a disputed description, and I won't release him privately while named witnesses and original records are available." Neville turned when Louisa approached. "You have no authority here." "She doesn't require authority over my premises," Henshaw said. "She gave notice before your attempted removal." Neville's eyes fixed on Louisa. "Caverton has made you bold." Louisa held his gaze. His Grace didn't file the objection. Henshaw's clerk stepped forward and asked for the carrier's order so it could be copied into the yard record. Neville understood that forcing the matter would place every act beneath named witnesses. He signaled the carriers to withdraw. The wagon rolled back into the street. Kestrel remained under Henshaw's neutral keeper. That evening, Mrs. Webb brought Louisa a single folded message. There was no Caverton crest pressed into the paper, and no servant waiting below. Dominic had written only one sentence. "May I call tomorrow and answer for what I did?" Dominic arrived at 11 on the morning of the 15th of October in a plain dark carriage, accompanied by his widowed aunt, Lady Eleanor Caverton, and carrying no flowers, no jewel case, and no expression arranged to make forgiveness seem inevitable. Mrs. Webb received them in the small Newmarket parlour and remained near the tea table, while Lady Eleanor took the chair beside the window. Louisa waited until everyone had settled before choosing the seat opposite Dominic. He looked as though he had slept little, but he did not offer weariness as evidence of remorse. "Thank you for allowing me to call," he said. "You ask to answer for what you did," Louisa replied. "I have promised only to listen. I understand." His hands rested open upon his knees. For once, stillness did not appear effortless in him. "I used your confidence without your permission. I made your claim look as though it had been purchased by my title and money. I spoke before the evidence was complete, and I warned Neville early enough to move the horse. Then I placed you beneath my authority in a room where your independence was already being questioned." He stopped. No defense followed. No suggestion that good intention should reduce the harm. Louisa held his gaze. "You believed you were protecting Kestrel." "Yes, and me." His jaw tightened. "Yes, protection without respect is still control. I know. Do you?" She leaned forward slightly. The room stopped asking whether the evidence was sound. They asked what I expected to gain from you. My name disappeared beneath yours. Dominic lowered his eyes for one brief moment. He did not rush to fill the silence. When he looked at her again, the practiced certainty had gone from his face. "I did that." The plainness of the answer hurt more than denial would have done. "I have no right to ask you to forgive me," he continued. "Then why are you here?" "To return what choice I can." He glanced toward the folded paper beside his gloves. "If you want me removed from the inquiry, I will withdraw. If you want Caverton servants, money, or influence kept from every step, I will obey. If you want no further contact from me, I will not call again." His voice roughened slightly. I won't call obedience a sacrifice. It is the least consequence of having taken a choice that wasn't mine. Louisa looked at the paper. What is that? An undertaking, unsigned. I thought you should decide the terms before I put my name beneath them. He moved the sheet halfway across the table, then stopped. May I? Louisa nodded. Dominic placed it before her and withdrew his hand. The document acknowledged that Louisa's observations belonged to her, that no statement would be made in her name without written permission, and that Caverton agents would not purchase, conceal, alter, or remove the disputed horse or any evidence connected to him. It also stated that Dominic's title would not be presented as support for any factual conclusion. Several blank lines remained below. It is incomplete, Louisa said. Yes. Deliberately. Yes. She drew a pencil toward her. The inquiry will remain in Newmarket. Agreed. She wrote the first condition. I speak before you do. Agreed. Every original record remains with its present custodian. Mr. Rook keeps the 1811 drawing, his account and the unfinished engraving plate. Mr. Noakes keeps his 1812 ledger. Mr. Price keeps his notebook. The White Hart veterinary surgeon keeps his account book. Dominic's attention sharpened at the final item, but he did not interrupt. Agreed. The sealed copper plate may remain with your solicitor only until transfer. Before any examination, the wax, signatures, box condition, key, and receiving custodian must be verified. Mr. Henshaw's solicitor may receive it only after both the Caverton and Peverell solicitors have accepted him in writing as independent. Agreed. Louisa wrote the clause carefully. You will disclose every financial interest Caverton has in the horse advertised as sovereign. Dominic was silent for one beat. I paid advance stud fees for 2 Caverton mares. Then that must be entered before the public examination. It will be, she added the condition. No private purchase, no settlement with Neville, no payment to Lady Camilla. No arrangement that removes the horse from scrutiny before identity is established. Agreed. The final condition pressed harder against her than the others. No formal courtship, no proposal, no financial inducement, and no use of affection to seek forgiveness before the public reckoning. Lady Eleanor's eyes lifted. Mrs. Webb remained still beside the tea-tray. Dominic did not pretend not to understand. Agreed. Louisa looked at him. That does not give you leave to assume private affection where none is offered. I understand. And it does not forbid me from choosing what I wish to give. His breathing changed, though his posture did not. I understand that too. Louisa set down the pencil. Those are the terms. Dominic drew the page back only far enough to sign beneath them. May Lady Eleanor and Mrs. Webb witness? Louisa nodded. Each woman added her name. Dominic sanded the ink, folded the paper once, and handed the original to Louisa. My solicitor will receive a separate statement of my obligations, not a copy of your private notes. You understand the distinction? I do now. Silence settled over the room. It was not reconciliation. The hurt between them remained too exact for that. Yet it was the first space in which reconciliation might one day be honest. Because neither rank nor tenderness had been permitted to shorten the distance, Dominic glanced again at the condition naming the White Hart account. You found something after leaving Rookhaven. Louisa kept her copied references inside the closed folio. The real sovereign died in April. Dominic went utterly still. What? A black stallion was taken ill at the White Hart during a Peverell transfer. The handler called him Sovereign. A local veterinary surgeon treated him for severe colic through the night. He died before dawn and was buried nearby. Who paid the account? Neville. Louisa described the original entry, the innkeeper's memory, and Neville's instruction that no one mention the death until the Peverell party had departed. The account book remains with the surgeon. The inn register remains with the innkeeper. I copied only dates, amounts, page references, and the exact wording used. Dominic absorbed the facts without reaching for her notes, and the horse at Henshaw's yard, still under neutral keeping. Mr. Henshaw refused Neville's private removal yesterday. Something like pride moved through Dominic's face, followed quickly by restraint. You stopped it. My written notice did, because you filed it. Louisa did not reject the credit. Neither did she invite more. Dominic looked toward the undertaking in her hand. My solicitor can bring the dispatch box tomorrow morning. The Peverell solicitor signed the original condition memorandum. I will instruct my solicitor to obtain his written acceptance of Mr. Henshaw's solicitor before the transfer. If he refuses, the box remains at Rookhaven unopened. Good. And if he agrees, the transfer happens once under all named signatures. Once, Louisa repeated. Dominic rose. Then I will do exactly what the undertaking requires, and nothing beyond it, unless you ask. He reached for his gloves. The movement brought his wrist within inches of her hand. Louisa acted before caution could turn the gesture into something it was not. Her fingers touched the inside of his wrist, lightly where his pulse moved beneath the skin. Dominic stopped. He did not cover her hand. He did not step closer. This is not forgiveness, Louisa said. I know. It is acknowledgement that you listened. His eyes held hers. Then I will be grateful for exactly that, and no more. Louisa withdrew first. He let her. A knock sounded below, followed by hurried steps upon the stairs. Mrs. Webb opened the door to Mr. Henshaw's clerk, who carried a sealed notice. Louisa broke the wafer and read. The disputed stallion had been placed formally under a neutral keeper selected by Henshaw. No private sale, removal, change of handler, or alteration of condition would be permitted before the scheduled examination. Dominic waited until she finished. What has happened? Kestrel is safe for now. Relief crossed his face, but he claimed no part of it. Louisa folded the notice and looked at the signed undertaking in her hand. Tomorrow you will stand where I ask you to stand, not where your title places you. The sealed black dispatch box reached Henshaw's Newmarket Yard shortly before 9 on the morning of the 16th of October, carried from Rookhaven in a closed carriage by Dominic's solicitor and the clerk who had held the key since the copper plate was wrapped. Louisa stood beneath the covered passage with Mrs. Webb beside her, while Mr. Henshaw, his own solicitor, Neville Peverell, and the Peverell solicitor waited near the office door. Dominic arrived with Lady Eleanor and stopped when he saw the chalk line Louisa had drawn across the packed earth before the inspection table. You asked where you should stand, she said, behind that line until I invite you forward. His gaze dropped to the mark, then returned to her face. Understood. He stepped behind it without argument. Neville gave a soft laugh. The Duke of Casterleigh reduced to a spectator in a matter affecting his own estate. Dominic removed his gloves. Miss Kelland is not conducting this inquiry under my authority. So we have repeatedly heard. Then repetition should not be necessary. Henshaw's solicitor called the room to order before the exchange could become theatre. Dominic's solicitor placed the dispatch box upon the table. The clerk produced the key but kept it in his hand. No one touched the lock. The original memorandum from the 8th of October was read aloud. It described the plate's condition before removal. the black varnish over visible blue enamel, the duplicate rivet holes, the sealed wrapper, and the signatures crossing each fold. It also required that any receiving solicitor be independent and accepted in writing by both Caverton and Peverell interests. The Peverell solicitor unfolded a document of his own. I have reviewed Mr. Henshaw's proposed custodian. I accept his solicitor as independent and for the limited purpose of holding the sealed box and producing it at the public examination. He signed the acknowledgement before Neville could object. Dominic's solicitor signed beneath him. Henshaw's solicitor added his name and the exact time. Only then did the clerk unlock the box, far enough for the outer condition to be compared with the earlier record. The wrapped plate remained inside. The red wax showed no break. Every signature across the folds remained intact. No one lifted the package. The contents correspond with the memorandum, Henshaw's solicitor said. The box itself shows no damage or substituted lock. The clerk handed him the key. All three solicitors then signed the transfer memorandum. Dominic's solicitor relinquished custody. Henshaw's solicitor closed the box, turned the key, and carried it into his office while every witness watched. He placed it inside an iron-bound cabinet fixed against the inner wall, locked the cabinet, and put both keys into his waistcoat pocket. The box will remain there until the public examination on the 18th, he said. It will not be moved, opened, copied, or surrendered before then, without the written assent of both solicitors and a named witness from each interest. One transfer, Louisa said. One transfer, he confirmed. The office door remained open long enough for the cabinet's position to be entered into the record. Then Henshaw turned the inquiry toward the horse. Kestrel waited in the central enclosure beneath the care of a neutral keeper, selected by Henshaw. No Peverell handler had entered since Louisa filed her notice. The stallion stood with his head high and his weight balanced for retreat. But he did not strike the rail or crowd the man beside him. Louisa remained outside the enclosure with the bone whistle untouched against her sketch case. One examination, she said. No whistle. No attempt to force a response. Price entered first. He checked the mouth and general development, then compared his observations with the notes he had made before seeing any later records. My estimate remains approximately 7, he said. I would not catalogue him as 6. Neville folded his arms. An estimate is not a birth register. No, Price replied. It is a professional estimate entered before I knew of any May purchase. Samuel Noakes approached next. He did not ask for the left hind foot immediately. He studied the coronet, waited for the stallion to settle, and then signaled the keeper to lift the leg. Kestrel resisted for one breath before yielding. Noakes traced the old line above the quarter with a blunt finger. This corresponds in position and growth with the crack I treated in autumn 1812. He did not call the horse Kestrel. He did not claim one scar could carry a name. Henshaw's solicitor entered the statement in exactly those terms. Now the account, Louisa said. A certified copy of a May 1817 trade entry was placed upon the table. Its original custodian had verified the copy and retained the source ledger. Henshaw's solicitor read aloud, 1 7-year-old black stallion, bred at the former Kelland stud, purchased through Thomas Vale and delivered upon instructions signed by Mr. Neville Peverell. The date fell 5 weeks after the black stallion called Sovereign had died at the White Hart. Payment had come from a Peverell account. The delivery instruction bore Neville's signature. The yard grew quiet. The name Kestrel does not appear, Neville said. No, Louisa replied. The record establishes age, color, origin, timing, payment, and delivery. It does not establish identity alone. Camilla, who had entered during the reading, stood beneath the far arch in dove-grey silk. "And the Duke's money?" she asked. "Does that also remain merely a correspondence?" Louisa looked toward Dominic, but did not speak for him. He stayed behind the chalk line. "I paid advance stud fees for 2 Caverton mares," he said. "Rookhaven expected financial and social benefit from the advertised sovereign pedigree." A murmur passed through the men near the office door. Dominic continued before anyone could mistake disclosure for defense. "For that reason, I withdraw my judgment from every decision concerning identity, sale, removal, or custody. My title, my money, and my belief are not evidence." Camilla stared at him. "You would surrender authority over a matter affecting your own house. I am refusing to use it where it would distort the result." Henshaw reviewed Price's note, Noakes's statement, the certified May account, and Louisa's written objection. "The lot remains withheld from my hammer. The horse remains under neutral keeping. No private removal will occur through this yard before the public examination on the 18th. Neville stepped toward the table. "You exceed your rights." "Not in my premises," Henshaw replied. "I decide what I offer and under what description." The neutral keeper led Kestrel back toward the sheltered enclosure. As the stallion passed Louisa, one ear turned toward the whistle against her case. She did not lift it. She had no need to ask him for another sign. When the witnesses dispersed, Louisa found Dominic in the covered passage beside the empty tack room. Mrs. Webb and Lady Eleanor remained within sight near Henshaw's office. The chalk line still lay between them. Dominic stood on the far side, his gloves loose in one hand. "You may cross now," Louisa said. He stepped over. That was more difficult than it should have been. Standing behind a line, watching the room reach a decision, while every instinct told me to force it there. Did waiting weaken the decision? No. His eyes held hers. It made the decision stronger, because it did not depend upon me. Something tender shifted within her. Not forgiveness, but recognition of change. Restraint is not absence, Dominic. It was the first time she had used his name since the breakfast room without anger. He heard it. His breathing changed, though he did not move closer. What is it, then? Chosen presence. Louisa crossed the remaining distance and put her arms around him. Dominic went completely still. His hands remained at his sides. She felt the discipline in that stillness and tightened her embrace, making the choice unmistakable. Only then did he hold her. One hand settled carefully between her shoulders, the other rested at her upper arm, warm and steady. There was no kiss and no attempt to turn the moment into reconciliation larger than she intended. Louisa closed her eyes for one breath. "This does not erase what happened," she said. "I know. It means I saw what you did today." His hold deepened by the smallest degree. "Then I will be grateful for exactly that." Louisa drew back first. Dominic released her at once. Mrs. Webb approached, carrying a folded message delivered by Camilla's maid. Louisa opened it beneath the passage light. Lady Camilla Peverell offered to surrender the original Kelland bond, cancel every remaining claim upon the debt, silence all further discussion of Louisa's father, and guarantee a commission large enough to secure her future. There was one condition. Miss Louisa Kelland must withdraw her objection before the public examination and acknowledge that grief had caused her to mistake sovereign for a horse long lost from her family's stud. Lady Camilla Peverell arrived at Louisa's Newmarket lodgings shortly before noon on the 17th of October, wearing dove-grey silk and an expression composed enough to resemble concern. Mrs. Webb remained beside the window with her sewing untouched in her lap. Louisa sat opposite Camilla at the round table, the folded message from the previous evening placed beside the tea tray. Her sketch case rested near her chair, and the bone whistle remained tied to its worn cord at the clasp. Camilla opened a narrow leather writing case and removed the original Kelland bond. Thomas Kelland's signature lay beneath the unpaid balance and the schedule attached to the dispersal of the stud. Louisa had seen the paper across Dominic's breakfast table. At closer range, the ink looked older and more human. "I'm pleased you agreed to receive me," Camilla said. "I agreed because you offered to surrender the bond, and I will." Camilla turned the document so Louisa could read it, though her gloved fingers remained upon one corner. "The remaining debt can be cancelled. The original will be marked discharged and released through the proper solicitors. No Peverell collector will use your father's name against you again." Louisa looked at the signature she had watched her father write before she understood what it would cost. In exchange for what? A correction. Camilla's voice was gentle. "You will withdraw your objection and state that grief led you to mistake Sovereign for a horse once bred by your family. You will acknowledge that the marks are inconclusive and that the Peverell description was made in good faith. The real Sovereign died in April." Camilla's fingers stilled. "A black stallion died. The handler called him Sovereign. A veterinary surgeon treated him. Neville paid the account and burial expenses. That still doesn't name the horse in Henshaw's yard. Not alone." "Then we understand one another." Camilla leaned back. "You have fragments. I am offering certainty. You are offering silence. I am offering release from a debt that has governed every choice you have made for almost 5 years." The words struck because they were accurate. Louisa had measured coal, rent, paper, lamp oil, travel, and food against the shadow of that bond. She had declined commissions she could not afford to reach. She had watched tradesmen recognize her surname before deciding whether to extend credit. Camilla knew precisely what she proposed to lift. "There is more," Camilla continued. "I will guarantee a commission sufficient to secure your position for the coming year. The Stallion will be withdrawn from public sale and kept from handling you consider distressing. No one need mention the Duke of Casterleigh's interest in you again." Mrs. Webb's needle remained suspended above the linen. Louisa did not look toward her. "Under which name will the horse be kept?" "The recognized name, Sovereign." "Yes." Camilla's tone sharpened slightly. "You cannot expect families to surrender years of subscriptions because one animal died unexpectedly. Peverell access, breeding agreements, and household arrangements rest upon that name. Then the name is what they purchased. They purchased value. They paid for identity." Camilla's mouth tightened. "You speak as though the horse acquired in May were some broken substitute. He is of excellent breeding. No mare owner was given an inferior animal." "Then why reduce his age?" Louisa asked. "Why repaint the plate? Why prevent neutral grooms from lifting his feet? Why attempt to remove him after questions were raised?" Camilla looked at the bond rather than Louisa. "Families sometimes act quickly to prevent panic. That is not the same as acting honestly. Honesty is easier for those whose survival does not depend upon reputation. My survival has depended upon reputation every day since my father's stud failed." Louisa's voice remained quiet. "The difference is that I have had to earn mine without a title to command belief." Camilla's eyes lifted. "And now you imagine Caverton's attention has placed you beyond consequence. No, his mistake taught me exactly how dangerous another person's authority can become when placed over my name. Then you should understand the kindness of my offer. I understand its price." Louisa looked once more at the bond. It could erase years of fear. It could also require her to repeat a lie beneath her own signature. "The debt is real," she said. "So is the evidence. One truth cannot be used to purchase the denial of another." Camilla's composure thinned. "You would refuse freedom from your father's failure for a horse. I am refusing to call obedience freedom, and if Caverton chooses his house over you tomorrow, that will be his choice. You believe he will continue to wait. I believe his behavior is his responsibility, just as mine is mine." Louisa folded her hands. "I won't withdraw the objection." Camilla slid the bond back into the leather case. "Then every person at Henshaw's Ring will hear what your father owed. They already know." Louisa met her gaze. "Tomorrow they will also know why you needed them to hear it before the records." Camilla rose. "You may find that dignity is poor protection against society." Louisa stood as well. "It has protected more of me than fear ever did." Camilla left with the original bond still inside her writing case. Only after the outer door closed did Mrs. Webb lower her sewing. "That paper could have altered your life. It still may. Do you regret refusing?" Louisa touched the whistle against her sketch case. "I regret that honesty was priced so exactly." Before the hour ended, Louisa's solicitor prepared a formal summary of Camilla's offer, naming the bond, the promised commission, the requested withdrawal, and the required false statement. Louisa signed the account. Copies were sent to Henshaw's solicitor, the Peverell solicitor, and the Marquess of Redmarsh. By mid-afternoon, a reply came from Redmarsh. The Marquess had appointed his family solicitor to attend the public examination on the 18th, observe the evidence, and report directly to him. He carried no criminal authority. He did carry enough family authority to prevent Camilla from later claiming that Redmarsh had not known what was done in its name. Dominic arrived at Louisa's solicitor's office near 4 with Lady Eleanor Caverton. Mrs. Webb and Lady Eleanor remained in the outer room while the business was conducted. Dominic carried a single signed statement. It acknowledged Caverton's advance stud fees for 2 mares, the financial and social benefit Rookhaven expected from Sovereign's advertised pedigree, and the conflict created by those interests. It also admitted that he had used Louisa's private confidence without permission, and made her claim appear dependent upon ducal authority. "No condition is attached?" Louisa's solicitor asked. "None. No request that Miss Kelland approve the wording. She may challenge it publicly if it is incomplete." Louisa watched Dominic surrender the paper without seeking reassurance from her face. Her solicitor signed a receipt, locked the original inside his file, and confirmed it would be read before the evidence the next morning. Henshaw's solicitor had also sent a written certification. The sealed dispatch box, transferred from Caverton custody on the 16th under signatures accepted by both interests, remained locked inside his iron-bound cabinet. The wax and wrapper signatures were intact. The key remained in his possession. The box had not moved. Dominic read the certification once and returned it to Louisa's solicitor. "It stays there until tomorrow," he said. "Yes," Louisa replied. When the documents were secured, Lady Eleanor and Mrs. Webb walked ahead into the inn courtyard, remaining within sight beneath the opposite arch. Dominic stopped without blocking Louisa's path. Late light rested on the brick walls and empty carriage shafts. "I heard what Camilla offered," he said, "after I refused it." Yes, anger moved beneath his restraint, but none of it turned toward Louisa. "I wanted to confront Neville and compel Camilla to surrender the bond. You didn't." "No. Why?" "Because your refusal wasn't an invitation for me to take control of its consequences." The answer reached the part of her trust that apology alone could not touch. Dominic looked toward the yard beyond the arch. "I don't know whether you'll ever trust me fully again. Neither do I." He accepted the uncertainty without flinching. "I won't ask you to decide tonight." Silence settled between them, warmer than the silence of his apology. Louisa could still remember the careful weight of his arms around her in Henshaw's passage, and the way he had remained still until she made the embrace unmistakable. Dominic did not step closer. "May I kiss you?" he asked. The directness of the question moved through her more deeply than assumption could have done. Louisa studied his face, the patience that had once been effort and was becoming character. Yes, even then, he waited. Louisa lifted one hand to his cheek and closed the final distance herself. His mouth met hers with restrained tenderness. Nothing in the kiss demanded absolution. Nothing claimed a future she had not yet chosen. Louisa felt his breath catch when her fingers curved lightly along his jaw. He touched her waist only after she leaned nearer, and his hand remained steady rather than possessive. She ended the kiss first. Dominic released her at once, though his gaze stayed upon hers. "This doesn't alter the undertaking," she said. "I know. It isn't forgiveness purchased in advance. I know that too. Tomorrow belongs to the truth. It will." Louisa lowered her hand, still aware of the warmth of his skin against her palm. From Henshaw's office, across the yard, came the sound of the iron-bound cabinet being checked and locked for the night. The sealed dispatch box remained exactly where it had been placed, on the 16th, untouched, and under the independent solicitor's key. At dawn, its contents would be brought before the ring, and the black varnish would finally be asked what name it had been hiding. The public ring at Henshaw's yard was full before 10 on the morning of the 18th of October. Yet the black stallion entered to no applause. Kestrel came beneath the covered arch beside Henshaw's neutral keeper, alert but no longer fighting every footstep near him. Buyers filled the benches. Breeders crowded the rail. Lady Camilla Peverell stood beside Neville, with the Redmarsh family solicitor several places behind them. Mr. Owen Price, Samuel Noakes, Elias Rook, the veterinary surgeon from near the White Hart, and the three solicitors waited at the long evidence table. Mrs. Webb and Lady Eleanor remained near Louisa. Dominic stood behind the chalk line, exactly where Louisa had instructed him to stand. The bone whistle rested against her sketch case, untouched. Henshaw raised one hand, and the yard quieted. "The stallion entered in my catalogue, as sovereign will not be offered until the objection to his description has been heard," he said. "No person here is empowered to decide criminal guilt. We are here to establish what may properly be represented in this yard, and what evidence must be placed before a magistrate." Louisa's solicitor stepped forward first with Dominic's signed statement. Dominic did not attempt to read it himself. He listened while another man spoke his failure aloud. The statement disclosed Caverton's advance stud fees for 2 mares, and the financial and social benefit Rookhaven had expected from Sovereign's advertised pedigree. It acknowledged that Dominic had used Louisa's private confidence without permission, announced an incomplete conclusion in her name, and made her observations appear dependent upon ducal authority. I believed I was protecting the horse, the statement ended. That belief did not grant me ownership of Miss Kelland's judgment, her evidence, or her name. My title and money are not proof. I withdraw them from every factual determination before this ring. Silence followed. Dominic remained behind the line. He did not look toward Louisa for absolution. Henshaw turned to her. Miss Kelland, present your objection. Louisa stepped to the table with no hand beneath her arm and no title before her name. I do not ask this company to accept memory as identity, she said. I ask that each record be considered for what it proves and no more. Price's notebook came first. It remained in his possession while he read the entry made before he knew the May purchase history. He estimated the Stallion at approximately 7 and stated that he would not describe the horse as 6. Noakes then opened his own 1812 ledger to the autumn entry for corrective shoeing on Kestrel's left hind quarter crack. He examined the healed line in the ring and said it corresponded in position and development with the injury he had treated. Though the mark alone could not establish identity, Elias Rook placed the original 1811 drawing upon a sloped board but kept one hand beside it. Louisa's signature, L. Kelland, remained visible beneath the yearling's forehoof, the paired forehead whorls, pale fleck inside the right heel, and left hind conformation matched the present horse. Rook's account, ledger and unfinished engraving plate remained with him. The drawing was made by Miss Kelland in 1811, he said, before debt, dispersal, or any dispute concerning this animal. Louisa did not touch the page. It remains Mr. Rook's record, she said, not mine, and not the Duke's. The White Hart veterinary surgeon opened his account book next. The April entry recorded treatment through the night for severe colic in a black stallion identified by the Peverell handler as Sovereign. The horse had died before dawn and been buried nearby. Neville Peverell had paid both attendance and burial expenses. The innkeeper's signed statement confirmed Neville's instruction that the death not be discussed until the Peverell party had departed. Neville's face had lost colour, but his voice remained sharp. A name given at an inn does not prove pedigree. No, Louisa replied. It proves that the horse presented there as Sovereign died in April. The certified May account followed. It described a 7-year-old black stallion from the former Kelland stud, purchased through Thomas Vale and delivered under instructions signed by Neville. The original ledger remained with its custodian. The certified copy had been verified by Henshaw's solicitor. Neville looked toward his own solicitor. The man did not challenge the signature. The name Kestrel is absent, Neville said. It is, Louisa answered. The account proves age, colour, origin, purchase date, payment, and delivery. It does not prove the hidden name. Then you still have no identity. We have not yet examined the plate. Henshaw's solicitor entered his office alone and returned carrying the black dispatch box from the iron-bound cabinet where it had remained since the single transfer on the 16th. He placed it upon the table. Before the key entered the lock, all 3 solicitors compared the box, lock, transfer memorandum, signatures, and cabinet record. The Caverton solicitor confirmed his earlier custody. The Peverell solicitor confirmed that he had accepted Henshaw's solicitor as independent. Henshaw's solicitor confirmed that the box had not moved and that the key had remained with him. The lock opened. Inside lay the wrapped copper plate. Every wax seal remained intact. Each signature crossing the folds was read aloud, including Neville's and his solicitors. The wrapper was opened once. The plate emerged with Sovereign Gen, still visible beneath black varnish and blue enamel showing at the chipped edge. A coppersmith stepped forward. His method had been agreed in writing by both interests. He applied a small quantity of spirit to one limited test area near the lower center, waited for the later varnish to soften, and used a blunt, wooden tool to lift it without scoring the blue enamel beneath. Black loosened in narrow curls. The first blue letter appeared, then another. No one spoke, as the coppersmith widened the test area only enough to reveal the older word. Kestrel emerged beneath Sovereign. The original letters faded but unmistakable. The silence that followed was so complete that Louisa heard the stallion breathe. Neville stepped toward the table. The plate could have been altered before Peverell acquired it. His own solicitor said quietly, "You signed the condition before removal. You signed the sealed wrapper. You accepted the custodian. That proves custody, not when the older name was painted." "No," Louisa said. "The older name alone would not prove identity, but it corresponds with the 1811 drawing, the 1812 ledger, the 7-year age estimate, the May purchase from the former Kelland stud, the death of Sovereign in April, the repainted plate, the altered age, and the restrictions on neutral examination." Henshaw looked at the catalogue upon his desk. He drew one firm line through the entry for Sovereign. "This lot is withdrawn. It will not be offered, removed, or represented from my yard under that description." A justice of the peace who had attended by prior notice came forward. He did not pronounce guilt. He took sworn informations from Louisa, Price, Noakes, Rook, the White Hart surgeon, Henshaw, and the relevant clerks. Neville was required to enter into recognizance with sureties to appear when summoned. The matter would proceed to the proper authorities, and, if supported, to the winter quarter sessions. The Redmarsh solicitor then addressed Camilla. "Pending the Marquess's inquiry, you are suspended from acting in any spotting, scription, or financial matter in the Redmarsh name." Camilla's composure broke only at the edges. "You cannot humiliate me here. I am not determining guilt," he said. "I am preventing further authority from being exercised before my client receives the evidence." Henshaw's solicitor rewrapped the copper plate. The seals already broken for examination could not be restored as though untouched, so a new legal wrapper was used. The plate was transferred under signed receipt to the clerk of the magistrates as an exhibit. The black dispatch box remained with Henshaw's solicitor, now empty. No one called Louisa, the girl, the artist, or the debtor's daughter. Henshaw faced the ring. The objection that prevented a misdescribed sale was filed by Miss Louisa Kelland. The surviving drawing was made by L. Kelland. Her distinction between memory, correspondence, and proof preserved this inquiry when others preferred speed. The words did not erase what had been done to her. They restored what should never have been taken: her name, her work, her judgment. After the ring emptied, Kestrel stood in the quiet enclosure beneath the neutral keeper's care. Louisa untied nothing. She lifted the bone whistle while it remained fastened to her sketch case and sounded the 3 notes once. The stallion turned. He crossed the enclosure without haste and stopped at the rail before her. Dominic remained behind the chalk line, though the public business was over. "May I stand beside you?" he asked. Louisa looked at the man who had once used love's earliest shape as authority and had since learned to wait without disappearing. Yes. He crossed the line and stopped at her side. He did not touch her. "I love you," he said. There was no proposal concealed inside the words, and no demand for an answer. I loved you when I thought protection meant deciding for you. I love you enough now to know that any future between us must be chosen by you, freely and more than once. Louisa placed her hand in his. I love you too. His fingers closed gently, and she did not release them. Not because you protected me, she continued, because you answered for the harm you caused, changed what you did, and stood back when standing back was hardest. Emotion moved openly across his face. May I kiss you? Louisa rose onto her toes and answered by closing the distance herself. His mouth met hers with tenderness, deepened by truth. The kiss held no urgency to outrun tomorrow. When she drew back, their hands remained joined. You may begin a proper courtship tomorrow, she said. A smile reached him slowly, almost disbelievingly. Tomorrow. Beyond the rail, Kestrel lowered his head without another note from the whistle. On the 24th of March, sunlight lay across the upper room of Louisa's Newmarket studio and touched the corner of a proof sheet bearing the name L. Kelland in firm black type. Beneath it, Mr. Henshaw's corrected catalogue credited the identification of Kestrel to the same hand. No courtesy title appeared beside the signature. No ducal name claimed the work. The Duchess of Casterleigh stood at the long table with a pencil between her fingers and studied the near foreleg of a young bay mare she had drawn that morning. On the sill beside her lay the small bone whistle, untied from the sketch case for the first time in years. It had not been sounded. Below the open window, hooves moved across the yard with the unhurried rhythm of an animal that no longer expected every approaching hand to become a command. Kestrel had remained in neutral care through the magistrate's inquiry and the winter proceedings. By the time the matter came before the quarter sessions, the chain of records was too complete for Neville Peverell to reduce it to memory or coincidence. He was convicted upon the charges supported by the evidence, ordered to make repayments where the court directed, and stripped of the profitable arrangements built upon the false description. The judgment did not restore the dead sovereign or erase every mare owner's loss, but it made deception costly in the language Neville had always understood. Lady Camilla Peverell faced a different reckoning. The Marquess of Redmarsh removed her from every sporting, subscription, and financial authority exercised in the family name. Invitations thinned. Committees that had once welcomed her calculation discovered principles after her influence became inconvenient. Louisa did not mistake social exile for repentance. Camilla had protected prestige until prestige abandoned her. That consequence was fitting enough. The original Kelland bond had travelled through solicitors rather than through any dramatic gesture. Redmarsh representatives surrendered it. The balance was formally discharged, and a deed of release ended the claim. Louisa's own solicitor now kept the marked original among her papers. It had not been burned, torn, or hidden. It survived as proof that freedom did not require the destruction of history. The repainted copper stall plate remained elsewhere as a legal exhibit under the custody established after the public examination. Louisa had not asked to hang it upon her wall. Kestrel's true name did not need to be displayed as a trophy. Dominic had understood that without being told twice. A soft knock sounded at the open studio door. He stood on the threshold, in a dark morning coat, one hand resting lightly against the frame. Marriage had not taught him to enter every room, as though affection had abolished permission. "May I come in?" he asked. Louisa set down the pencil. "You may." He crossed the room only after her answer. His gaze moved first to the drawing, then to the proof sheet. and finally to the whistle upon the sill. You signed the catalogue. I signed the work, as L. Kelland, as I always will. A smile warmed his face. Good. Their marriage settlement had been completed before the wedding on the 10th of February, not as an ornament to the match, but as one of its foundations. Trustees protected Louisa's earnings, studio, commissions, and professional name. The arrangements concerning Kestrel placed the Stallion's welfare and future beyond the reach of any single impulse, including Dominic's. He had disclosed every proposed expense, accepted the trustees' oversight, and refused to call generosity what was in fact an obligation to preserve her independence. Courtship had begun on the 19th of October with a morning call made under Mrs. Webb's watchful eye. Dominic had brought no jewels. He had brought the latest account of Kestrel's condition, and asked Louisa which walk she preferred. In December, when he proposed, he had done so in the studio, after requesting permission to speak of marriage. Louisa had not accepted because a duke offered rank, rescue, or security. She had accepted because the man before her had learned that love did not become smaller when it was asked to wait. Mrs. Webb says you have been here since 7, Dominic said. Mrs. Webb has become alarmingly loyal to accurate reporting. She has also informed me that you forgot breakfast. I postponed it. That sounds suspiciously like the language I once used for decisions. Louisa looked at him over the edge of the table. And you remember how well that served you? Painfully. He did not reach for the drawing. May I see? The familiar question carried more tenderness now than hesitation. Louisa turned the paper toward him. The shoulder is wrong, she said. It is graceful. Graceful can still be wrong. Then I will admire it after you correct it. He leaned beside her without crowding her hand. Their sleeves touched lightly. The contact belonged to ordinary life now, yet it had not become careless. Louisa studied the unfinished line and felt a quiet gratitude that did not resemble debt. Do you regret the settlement? She asked. Dominic looked at her at once. No, even the trustees, especially the trustees. And the provision that my earnings remain mine? Your work was yours before I loved you. Marriage did not improve my claim to it. His answer came without performance. I wanted a life with you, Louisa. I did not want ownership disguised as devotion. She held his gaze. You still choose quickly. I do. You still command entire rooms before breakfast. Only the rooms that have consented to be commanded. She laughed, and the sound softened the studio. Dominic's expression changed at hearing it. The old restraint remained, but happiness no longer frightened him into hiding. I love you, he said. He had spoken the words before witnesses, in private rooms, during the wedding service's quiet aftermath, and once in the dark when neither of them could sleep. He never used repetition to make them less deliberate. Louisa stepped around the table. I love you too. She placed one hand against his cheek and kissed him. Dominic waited for the first pressure of her mouth before his hand settled at her waist. The kiss was warm, unhurried, and entirely hers to deepen or end. She drew back only when Kestrel gave a low breath in the yard below. Dominic rested his forehead briefly against hers. He has been watching the gate for 10 minutes, he said. Has anyone called him? No. Louisa turned toward the window. Kestrel stood at the far side of the paddock, while a groom waited near the open gate, with the lead folded over one arm. No one shortened the distance. No one lifted a hand. After a moment, the stallion began to walk. He crossed the paddock at his own pace, paused once to study the groom, then continued until he stood beside the gate. The man did not seize the halter. He offered his open palm. Kestrel lowered his head toward it. Louisa looked at the whistle, lying silent upon the sill. Her father's 3 notes had once called a frightened horse through a gate he had not chosen. Years later, those same notes had turned Kestrel toward the woman who remembered him when every profitable name had tried to erase his own. Now no sound was needed. Trust had ceased to be an instruction. Dominic offered his arm, but did not presume she would take it. "Shall we go down?" Louisa looked once more at the signed proof, the unfinished drawing, and the bone whistle resting in the March light. Then she slipped her hand through his arm. Yes. Together they crossed the studio, leaving the door open behind them. Below, Kestrel waited at the gate by choice, and the whistle remained silent on the sill.